It was about 24 years ago. I was sitting on the floor of my dojo and my life had lost its purpose. And you've probably been there where the whole world is collapsing around you, almost to the point of, is this some type of joke that the universe is playing on me? Because it's just one thing after another. And I felt as though there was really no way out. And I was sitting in my dojo, and my then business partner, Sharon Nakazato Sensei, who was the director of the Yasuragi Cultural Arts Center, she sat down next to me and she simply said, "Adam, lift yourself up and your Ikigai will reveal itself." And I didn't know what that word meant. I don't even know if I had ever heard it then, but she explained to me that it is my life's work. It's my purpose. I didn't really understand at that time what that meant. However, what she had said to me stuck with me. And it has been since then that I've been on this mission to learn and understand about life's direction, being able to fulfill exactly that role that my teacher said when someone asked him, "Why do we study Kobudo? Why do we simulate these acts of killing? What is the value in that?" And without hesitation, he quickly answered, "To make a better person." And Ikigai, in this Japanese understanding of a word that is extremely simple, and has been taken in the Western context as this formula and as this thing to go after and pursue. And my friend Nick Kemp has made it his life's work to change that, to make sure that the Western audience understands and can find the deep value of Ikigai and how they can use the wisdom of this to have a life worth living, to be able to pursue a brighter future, to be able to have their own North Star, to be able to find it in community. We go into the Ibasho, we go into all these different concepts around Ikigai and all the study and academics that's been around this. He talks about in his podcast. He has an enormous and respectful body of work on this topic that can help anybody. And if you're someone right now who has just sort of maybe lost their direction, feels that there's no wind in your sails right now, you've lost motivation, maybe you're a little bit down, or maybe life has just shifted so much that you don't have that direction and you need some new inspiration, this next hour with Nick Kemp is going to be extremely valuable to you. And I'm glad you're here with us on this episode of Shugyo. So please enjoy. I want to welcome again my friend Nick, and let's get started. Welcome to Shugyo, reflections on the path to self-mastery and forging the way. My name is Adam Mitchell. I'm your host and fellow student along this path. Nick is the Ikigai coach. He's a father, husband. He's a Japanologist, researcher, solopreneur, and the author of Ikigai-kan, Feel a Life Worth Living. He's a founder and head coach of Ikigai Tribe, which is a small community of educators, psychologists, coaches, and trainers who serve their personal communities using the Ikigai concept. I'm sure you probably have heard the word Ikigai, and if you have, then I am sure that you have heard Nick's voice with his incredible podcast. Before we get started, Nick, I just really want to take this opportunity before we kick off our conversation, because I acknowledge that oftentimes in the work that we do, we don't see the concentric effects that we often create through the work that we do. And I want to tell you, from someone who has a life that your work has touched, I want to thank you. And I'm also sure that I'm not alone. I'm sure that through your podcast, through your incredible book here, which I want everybody, if you have not read this, you need to stop this episode right now, hop on over to his website and purchase it, because it will shift your lens. It will change a lot of things. And especially if you're someone who is into Japanese arts, culture, if you're into bettering your life, increasing your performance in your work, in your relationships, this is something that is a must-have on your bookshelf. Nick, I just want to thank you and share my gratitude for the work that you've done for myself and for many. It really is impactful, and you are doing an incredible job. So before we get started, just thank you so much, man.
Well, Adam, thank you so much. That's a real joy to hear. It's always a pleasure to know that the work you do impacts someone, and real joy to be catching up with you, and really happy and honored also to be a guest on your podcast. So thank you for having me.
Thanks. Nick, I want to, as we were talking about before we hit the record button, I want to sort of extract your experience as someone who traveled to Japan, lived in Japan, and sought out this foreign and very, at the time, I'm sure, in your life, a unique way of looking at the world. And you ended up finding this concept called Ikigai. You found it, and as I understand through reading your book, it created you were able to discover a definition of it that had changed within you. You took this, you brought it back, you studied it, and not only did you study it, but you studied it and sort of opened up the English speaking world. I mean, there had been books written about this, sure, but you had brought in the community of educators, of people who have PhDs and this stuff, and people who study at universities in Japan and throughout the world. You have brought in people in all different types of life that have used and understand Ikigai, and you have created something quite monumental. I'd like to really dive into the story of Nick and how this happened. And then for our listeners and for the people who are watching this on YouTube, then we can talk more about some of the specifics about Ikigai. Maybe even, there's a lot of misunderstanding, of course, and they can, I'm going to have a whole bunch of links. People can kind of learn about your work and sort of demystifying it and bringing deeper definition to Ikigai for your listeners. We'll point them all over there. Right now, really the focus is on you. Let's take a minute and go back to the beginning here of your story and lead us up to a little bit here where you were introduced to Ikigai and what got you there.
Yeah, so it is an interesting story in that it was a very casual introduction. So I think in the book I mentioned, I actually first went to Japan in 1977 when I was like 5, and that was only a few days, but I still have some vague memories of that trip, some fond memories. Then I went back in 95 to become a trainee chef and was learning to cook. And then I moved out of hospitality and went back 2 years later and to teach English, like many people did and maybe still do. And, being young and ambitious, I was really into learning Japanese. And I remember after the first week of training, I was given the location of my school. And so I went in for the first day of work, and on this lunch break, while walking to a cafe or restaurant, I was sort of trying to use all my Japanese and probably to impress the coworker. And she casually asked, "Oh, Nick, what's your Ikigai in Japanese?" And I'm like, "Oh, what's Ikigai?" And she gave me this amazing definition that sort of left me thinking, wow, you have one word that articulates all that, like purpose and the reason why we battle on in life. And it was so inspiring. I thought, wow, because obviously at the time I was wanting to learn lots of Japanese words. And I remember going back into the staff room and asking the other foreign teachers, like, hey, have you heard of this word Ikigai? And no one had. And yeah, it really made me think, and I was sort of thinking about it, obviously, the rest of that day and that evening. And I was so looking forward to going into work the next day to talk to this coworker about the word. And yeah, I walk in and I say, oh, I can't remember her name, but I sort of said, oh, where's so-and-so? And they said, oh, she's been transferred. And I remember the disappointment. And yeah, I mean, the irony of all this is the word is not often used. You'd know that, like, yarigai is far more used, which is relatable to the word, but yarigai meaning something worth doing or something rewarding. So I never really heard the use of Ikigai after that, despite living in Japan for like 8 years. So it's really unusual that in one conversation, someone introduced it to me casually. Yet after that, I never really heard it, or if I had heard it, it didn't have the sort of the same profound impact. And then it was actually after I'd left Japan that, I discovered the Venn diagram and all these romantic notions linked to the word that I thought, I remember that word, but that's not how it's explained to me. And that sort of started this journey of, researching it and talking to Japanese and non-Japanese about it.
What was the first step on that journey, Nick?
Yeah, this is one of those moments in your life where you've got this little voice saying you should do something about it. Like everything about the concept's factually wrong online. And I was like, well, can't be me. Like I'm not a psychologist. I have no academic background. So I kind of put it off. I kept on putting off, but there was this little voice saying, this is wrong. So I almost saw it as an injustice to Japanese culture, like this amazing word. And we're thinking it's this sweet spot or these romantic links. So eventually I sort of caved into my better true version of myself, I guess, and thought, okay, well, if I could get a podcast going and if I could get a researcher or a Japanese author or expert, I knew that would be a great way to offer the Japanese perspective. And I remember the day thinking, sort of telling myself, just buy a domain, email this researcher who happened to appear in several blog posts. And that's what I did. So it was this idea to try and investigate it with the hope of offering, a respectful perspective. And luckily, Professor Akihiro Hasegawa sensei, agreed to that first episode, and he was so courageous because his English is, minimal, very, very little English skill. So he was very courageous, and I'll be forever grateful to him.
It's an incredible
really
episode.
kicked it off.
Yeah. And if my memory is correct, the person who was responsible for the Venn diagram, you got on your podcast, which so much respect. I love the disruptive nature of that. It's great. And kind of like, also respect to him for coming on it. And I didn't really want to go into that in this episode, but there's so much to that, because one Google search on Ikigai, and that's just boom, that's all you're going to get is that Venn diagram. And you actually called it, wasn't he like on something about him living on an oil platform, or was there something about that I seem to remember, some crazy story about his life and when he did that. So we don't have to dive into that, but let me shift. How much since then do you think that your work has shifted the Western idea of this word?
Oh, if you go online, it seems to have had little impact. But but I mean, just quickly on Mark Wynn, who merged the purpose Venn diagram with Ikigai. For him, it was just a creative idea, and it took him less than 40 minutes, and it was nothing more than that. It was just an idea to share with his friends, and he had no idea it would have this impact. Yeah, so that's the irony of that. And then in many ways, I'm grateful, because if that Venn diagram didn't exist, I would not be doing the work that I'm doing. And it does. It's usually the first step for someone to find me. They find the Venn diagram, they get inspired, they do more research, more searching on Google, and then they'll find my podcast or website. It's had a strong impact in that it seems to profoundly impact certain people who are interested in either Japanese culture or are just interested about learning about themselves or exploring what life could mean to them. So sometimes I get these emails and they blow me away, like yours. my cohorts where I'm walking through what Ikigai is, sometimes we share very intimate, private details of our life. It gets emotional. So it has that impact. So it's a small but profound and meaningful impact for me.
I'd say this is probably a good time for anybody who's listening to this who doesn't, this is the first introduction they have to Ikigai. What does it mean? What's your definition?
Yeah, so this is both an easy answer or a challenging answer. I like to refer to the definition of Miyako Kamiya, who I like to call the mother of Ikigai. So you have Ikigai sources in your life that can be people, relationships, goals, even small joys like, your morning cup of coffee, maybe a dedication to an art or a craft or a martial art such as yourself. And then from that source, you experience emotion, or you can even embody it, feel it in your body. But it's really the things in your life that make you feel that life is worth living. So even just the laughter of your children could be that one thing in a day where you think, it's so nice to hear them laugh. It's good to be alive. Or it could be something you dedicate your life to, like shokunin, like these Japanese craftsmen. And that pursuit just is ongoing, and it's incredibly meaningful and fulfilling and satisfying for them. So that sort of the best answer is to ask yourself, what makes my life feel worth living? And hopefully you have multiple answers, and it's not just one perfect answer where it's your whole life is, bliss or something.
Yeah, this is where the conversation gets interesting. And in the part in your book where you're referencing Ikigai no Suite, you reference that there are actually, I believe there's kind of those two questions. And like you just said, what makes your life worth living every day? But then there's also, how does one find a new Ikigai when they've sort of lost that reason to live and they feel empty? Could you say a little bit about that? Because what I find interesting and about that question is, really, especially like in the martial arts, where it's the path, it's the do. It's not so much the accomplishment of or achieving something. It's the path that you're on. And I'm wondering if that reference that Miyako Kamiya is, that question that she's asking, is that the Ikigai? Is it the finding of the Ikigai? And I know you get into this later on in the book, but in your perspective, did you have those questions, or what were some of the questions that you first asked yourself? Because for me, this is one of the things that I bumped up against. I was like, is it going out and finding a new Ikigai, or is it the discovery process of the Ikigai that becomes that feeling of a life worth living?
Yeah, this is interesting because, obviously I knew it wasn't the Venn diagram. So I knew it wasn't some ultimate goal. And living in Japan and understanding the culture, I had some awareness. It's more about process or smaller things and sense of growth over achievement of goal, for example. But I approached it more like I want to learn as much as I can. And that led me to discovering Miyako Kamiya. One thing that she said is when you do lose your Ikigai, it's often a collapse of your value system. Meaning, a good example might be you're in love, you've married someone, everything's going great. And then you find out, even before you married, they were cheating on you with your best friend. And so all these values you might have of love, commitment, transparency, honesty, you may feel they've kind of violated you, like you believed in them and now this horrible thing's happened. You've lost this love of your life. It's destroyed your best friendship. And in extreme cases, it might be the actual loss of a loved one who dies. And a really good example of that is Ricky Gervais's Afterlife. I don't know if you've seen that series. It's a comedy.
No.
He's a comedian. But
Yes, I have. Yeah.
It starts with him. He's just lost his wife who he loved, and he's struggling to live. And in the process of that series, you see him kind of regain a sense of Ikigai through new friendships, new relationships. So one thing is crucial, that it's definitely tied to your values. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then the other idea is, if you're looking for Ikigai, it obviously means you feel you don't have it. And that if you do have it, then you're likely that you're not looking for it, and your life is satisfied by various things. And it's so weird, because it's just a word that Japanese don't often use. And when you ask Japanese, what is their Ikigai, they'll often say, oh, it's my pet. Or the most recent person told me it was camping with his friends. Yet, as you now know, there's a huge body of research behind Ikigai. It's growing. It's been linked to logotherapy, existential positive psychology, elements, obviously even philosophical elements. So it's also the subject of research and study. So trying to go back to your question, but I guess for me it was finding the work of Miko Kamiya, and she obviously had this personal quest to define it and learn how one could experience Ikigai even under extreme hardship. And, in the book I wrote about how she spent time interviewing Japanese lepers who were shipped off mainland Japan. They were promised this, really great life, and it was a complete lie. Their basic needs were met, but other than that, it was up to them to try and make meaning and sense of their life. And obviously most didn't. They struggled with their condition and this lack of acceptance from society. But some could. And so that the handful that could was really interesting. There's one story where she talks about this blind man who had no fingers fell in love with learning the harmonica. And he would learn to read music with braille using his lips and tongue. And he was so dedicated to it, he would read it to the point where his lips and tongue would bleed. And that was his Ikigai, learning the harmonica and playing the harmonica would give him a sense that life is worth living.
What would you say? One of the things for me that studying a Japanese art such as kobudo is that I had to really relearn how to learn and be able to do so under a Japanese teacher, where I'm a sort of, I was a rebellious kid. I would always kind of question the status quo. I would always look for, instead of looking for the reason in the lesson, I would look for what's the pushback in the lesson.
Yeah.
Where's the point of argument I can find here? And that, as you know, that just did not jive in the dojo. I'm curious to hear, what were some of the obstacles in your research, in your discovery process of Ikigai, that not only did you can reflect back on and say, yeah, that was in the moment I didn't know it was a sticking point, but now looking back, it certainly was. Or did that come in sort of a moment of an aha moment where you're like, oh, wow, okay, now I get that. And all of a sudden things really expand for you.
That's interesting. I think the experience was a bit different. I think when I first went to Japan, when I was much younger, I had that resistance and that judgment. Like, I just think, Japanese put salt on watermelon. How weird is that? Or, or just things I found unusual, I would instantly judge. I think all these set expressions, they say the same thing every day. It's becomes meaningless. And so I had that resistance or almost this negativity to things I thought were unusual. So I'm probably lucky in that once I started getting into Ikigai, I was a little bit more older and mature, maybe a little bit wiser, and I was happy to learn and didn't have any resistance. It was more that there's all these different perspectives of Ikigai, even among Japanese researchers. And so I thought, I'm ready to embrace them all. And yeah, I mean, there's someone like Ken Mogi who will call Ikigai a spectrum of small things. And he'll say he can easily identify 100 sources of Ikigai in his life, from his morning cup of coffee to running to having engaging conversations to researching. And he really lives that life. If you know Ken, he's got this amazing life. He's always running and making short videos in Japanese and English on YouTube almost every day, sharing these gold nuggets of wisdom. And then I'd find a book, one book written by Tsukasa Kobayashi, written a long time ago. It's only in Japanese, but it's Ikigai, The Road to Self-Actualization. And he would relate Ikigai to the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this desire to grow or to self-actualize. And he would say, your play can't be your Ikigai. That's a sobi guy. So the verb is the verb for play. So that's just play worth doing. And your work can't be your Ikigai. That's just work worth doing. So he'll say it's this sort of high level thing that then sort of makes it hard to attain or not attain, I guess, attain or access, because it's like, well, okay, I have to self-actualize now to feel Ikigai. So I was open to all these different perspectives, and then I guess I like to present them, and then you have someone else saying, oh, Ikigai is tied to your social world, and it's more about relationships. And then we have these sub-theories, which we touched on, like Ibasho, like this place to be. And it goes on and on and on. And I've really embraced the idea of I'll just learn it all.
Have you found that through your work now that people look at the path and the coaching or the learning of Ikigai that they have to have self-actualization before they can achieve that? Or is Ikigai in working towards, like, for example, being able to acknowledge that spectrum, like you just said, is that something that helps lead them to that self-actualization? I know that for me, my first introduction to the word, Nick, was I was in a really very low point in my life. And my then business partner in the Japan Arts Center that I was running, Sharon Nakazato, she is an older woman, and she's a Shodo master, and she's very, very steeped in this type of philosophy. And we were sitting on the floor of the dojo one day, and I was really, really down. Oh. And she explained to me that you need to lift yourself up and be able to discover your Ikigai. And this purpose will give you the momentum that you need to be able to carry yourself forward. But right now, you won't discover that unless you lift yourself up. And I've always sort of, when this word comes up or we have these conversations, I really wonder about that emotion that I was having in that moment, because it really helped me to you say, like, the importance of creating a bright future. and that Ikigai sort of like became, okay, there's this North Star. I will have purpose. I will have meaning, and that will come. The Ikigai will appear. It will appear itself so long as I work towards, whether it's Kamiya's 7 Ikigai needs and making sure I'm sort of checking the boxes on those. But knowing that there's a bright future ahead, I need to lift myself up and the Ikigai will appear. And I'm curious, that's really sort of an interesting point of, I don't know, reflection or study. And I was just fascinated to hear your feedback on that one thing there.
Yeah, that is a crucial
around that
point. Yeah, that's what that also appealed to me. It's more like you have this sense your life is moving forward. And yeah, that ties into a definition that it's not just a state of well-being. It's also this sense you feel your life is moving forward, and it's not a fixation on the achievement of a goal, where like, once I achieve this, I'll be happy, which we have this tendency to do in the West. It's more like I have something to work towards. I have things in my life to look forward to. And you have this path that might be a bit uncertain or vague, but it's rather than driving you, it's almost like pulling you. And obviously that gives you a sense of hope. Yeah, like, there is something to live for, because I feel I'm moving forward to something. And when that's subjective, and I guess each individual might experience that, or will experience that differently. But if it is tied to a strong sense of purpose, where you feel like you are of service or you're serving a greater good, then you might feel that feeling more intensely. And that's a crucial aspect. But in some way, I feel like Ikigai gives you the chance to also find yourself, because it ties to, so many things, your values. And I mean, her idea of self-actualization is this idea of the joy of creation and expressing your unique imagination. And that blew me away. So that's one of Kamiya's Ikigai needs. And what an alternative to the Western idea of it's attaining a certain level or being successful or being, the best version of yourself. You constantly hear that in self-help. Like, we all want to be the best version of ourselves, which is obviously it's unattainable. And it puts this pressure on, like, I have to be this best version. Where she's saying, use your unique imagination to express yourself. And that can be through something creative, but it can be through a role. It can be through your work. So that's what I do in my work. I've used my unique imagination to create, this community. And I think once you're doing that, you're being jibun rashi. So there's so many words that articulate these ideas that I just love. Like, I can be the person I want to be. Jibun rashi, the person I see worthy of me. It's a little bit hard, but the person I want to be comes from me pursuing Ikigai. And I guess one of my Ikigai is obviously researching Ikigai and sharing it with, the world.
There's, as you're going through those words, I'm thinking of kokorozashi. You referenced that. It's like, where the spirit or where the heart moves towards, right? And I stumbled on that. I stumbled over that because in that moment when I first heard Ikigai, I was like, I don't know. I'm not going to be able to get out of this. Things are so low right now. And I don't know if my heart is pointing anywhere. And that's when Nakazato Sensei explained to me, like, it will reveal itself. Your heart is pointing somewhere. You need to get this clutter out of the way. One of the things I really admire about your work, Nick, in the book is that you don't just, and for someone, maybe any of the listeners who are at a low point right now, which many of us are, and I kind of want to unpack Ibasho, like you just mentioned, and I really want to go there. But in this kokorozashi, like if you're in this place where I don't know what I want, or I could tell you I have, for my dojo, I teach adults, and we do, with my online work, I try to get a lot of information from the people who inquire about training at my dojo. And I will tell you that much, much higher than 9 out of 10 are middle-aged men who are, who have a great energy. They want to hold on to their vitality, but there's sort of this loss of purpose. Maybe they're in retirement years, the kids have moved out of the house, and they're kind of like, what now? Where's my heart pointing? Where's my heart pointing? And what I really respect about your work is that you give, not only do you say, oh, you got to go where your heart is pointing, which a lot of self-help stuff does, but you actually do provide things for us to look into, like Nikon is an example, right? Mm-hmm. Like actually how to do this beautiful process of journaling to help you to discover where your heart is pointing, where that kokorozashi is. Could you share maybe a couple of other of those tools or methods that you discovered, not only to maybe methods that you found have helped your community that you work with, but also what are some of those methods that helped you to see more clearly where your heart was pointing, to feel or to be able to step back and see the canvas or the spectrum of your own Ikigai? What helped you there?
Sure. I'll share with you. I think before really diving into Ikigai, I did go through periods of depression and frustration and struggle and unfulfillment. So me deciding to research Ikigai and just listening to this intuition, like, oh, you should do something about this. You should, interview people. You should start a blog. It gave me this purpose, or this sense of purpose. And I had no idea what would happen. And so I remember the day I actually looked up, I really looked into, once I started getting into Ikigai, I really paid attention to the kanji characters of words. And I remember thinking about purpose and looking at the kanji characters of purpose and realized it translated to use life, meaning use your life. And so Ikigai-kan, this idea of sense of purpose, is the feeling of using your life. And that's just an amazing definition. Like, how can I use my life in a way that's satisfying to me, but beneficial to others, or purposeful or meaningful to others? And it was like an epiphany. Like, that's what people want. They know with life experience, if you achieve certain goals, there is this period of, satisfaction or elation. But then it's like, what do I do now? And we're struggling in life to achieve all these things. And then most of the time when we attain them, we don't have the feeling we thought we would. But this sense of using your life in some way that's beneficial, whether it's small or ambitious, seems to really, make life worth living. The other thing I've noticed with cohorts is how I have a lot of discussion in my cohorts for the coaching program. So it's not just me for 2 hours speaking about what it is. Most of it's sharing a concept and then saying, let's discuss it. And people really love that. They really appreciate that they have equal opportunity to share their thoughts. And, sometimes my cohorts will go over by an hour, and I'm happy to do that. And it's really weird. No one's saying, oh, I have to get off this call. They're saying, yeah, I can keep going. So the opportunity to talk about these things seems really valuable. And obviously we don't, and we certainly don't have these conversations perhaps with the most important people in our lives. And maybe maybe sometimes we can't because of various complications. But getting a handful of strangers together, and by the second week, they're revealing all these personal aspects of their life, or they're sharing their perspectives, and they know they can do that in a safe and comfortable environment. It leads to this collective learning. And I'm like so privileged because I get to learn so much from the others. So I can't remember what your question was. But I mean, going back to Kokorozashi, that blew me away. That was like, and maybe that's the kind of word that would appeal to, the young, ambitious male, like, oh yeah, But again, it's about process, and it's about this idea of, Kokoro's sort of like the mind, the heart, and the spirit as one entity. So it's where your mind's focused on, where your heart's pointed, and where your spirit wants to go. And it's like the start of the journey, This is the journey. And as you know, it's sort of rooted in Bushido. And I guess I was told by a podcast guest that, samurai would die for their kokorozashi. That's what the commitment was.
Yeah, I feel you answered the question quite clearly, actually. There were two things that stood out for me, Nick. One was your exploration into the kanji and really breaking it down so that you understood it. And then also the cohorts, which is a great segue into Ibasho. There is a bit of a flag on the field, though, that I want to throw, and I want to sort of challenge you. And that is you talked about your own intuition, and then you also shared with us your introduction to Ikigai, which was through this girl that in passing said it, and then all of a sudden she disappears, right? She's not there. I had an experience in my life where I had literally thrown everything away, and I had I'm not going to get into the details of it because they're pretty crazy, but I ended up on a bicycle in 1993 riding across Canada, and I ended up with some on a reservation with some beautiful indigenous people who took me in. And I really, truly learned that not belief, but knowing that nothing happens without a reason. This was proven to me. It wasn't like, oh, coincidence. Oh, well, that just happened. So I just want to tether two things that you mentioned. And I want to know how you really, truly believe. And I'm not saying was this like divinely inspired, or was it that actually when you let go, the road clears itself, like the Tao reveals itself, the path opens itself up. And it doesn't sound to me, based on what I've read and every one of your podcasts that I've listened to and the conversations I've had, that this wasn't by chance, that this just didn't happen, that this person showed up and then disappeared while you're sort of bumming around Japan trying to learn a trade. And then all of a sudden this happens. And now you're talking to me about your intuition, and it's leading you down these very productive and illuminating pathways. Where do you fall in that? How do you feel about that?
Oh, I feel good about it. I guess I would probably, what comes to mind instantly is what I read about in the book, and the idea of the triggers for transformational experiences are all around us. And this is referencing Miyako Kamiya again, and that we don't notice them most of the time. Yes, because we're stressed, we're busy, we're living in thought of the past, ruminating or anxious about the future, and we miss these triggers. And she wrote that the triggers for transformation exist in our everyday life, and we just don't see them. I think there are moments in your life where you have this clarity, and if you tuned in enough to think, okay, I will do this, I will start this, stop this, whatever it is, that is like you've picked up, there's been some trigger, and you've had this internal conversation that's clear, and it's not you saying, oh, well, what would I know? I don't know enough, or that can't be me, or I can't be bothered, or you have this, all right. But for me, it was like this injustice. I thought, this is an injustice that I can't tolerate. So I will do something about it, but not in a obviously ego sort of driven way. I just thought I'll start a podcast, but it felt so right at the time. But then if I reflect on the sort of the chain of events that led to this experience, it's these small interactions. So it's, this coworker who I only met one day, casually asking me what my Ikigai was. It's years later, the Venn diagram, which, I could say Mark Wynn in many ways has changed my life, because without that Venn diagram, this would not be happening. We would not be talking. So in many ways, I'm grateful to him. But then had I not had that conversation with that coworker, of course, even if it saw the Venn diagram, maybe I wouldn't be talking with you today. So there's been these little interactions. So I don't know what to call that, if that's the universe conspiring to help you, or God, or if it's just for some reason in my life journey, at one point it was a realization subconsciously of these little things coming together, and I had this one moment of clarity thinking, I will get a domain name and start a podcast. That was the initial thought, to try and share a Japanese perspective. So, I'm just kind of careful of how do you read into that, because some people might say, oh, that's God talking to you, or some people must say that everything in your life's meant to happen, or I might just say it was, a moment of clarity and I followed my intuition. Yeah. And it's
I think
changed
all of
my
the
life.
Many of the great faiths and sort of the models of spirituality and religions, I think all of them that have lasted, one of the core teachings is that miracles are happening all around us all the time. And the more we let go, the more we're able to witness and be witness to them. And, I just wanted to hear, because I'm sure that happening didn't go unnoticed to you. I'm sure that you're like, wow, this is really growing, and people, it's really helping and serving. And, I'm sure you acknowledge this.
Yeah, I mean, I think I let go in that moment, like the fear of, it can't be me and all this negative self-talk. I let go and thought, all right,
yeah.
I'll start. I'll just do this. So I'll start almost like Ken Moggy, start small. I'll just do this, and not let any negative self-talk sort of drive me away from it. Obviously, I cared about it. I don't know why it meant so much to me. It obviously, love of Japan and learning, but it's weird. We have these thoughts or moments in our life where they might change our life, and we just hope we can be tuned into that moment enough to then take the first step of action. Because often we have those moments and then we go, oh, it's too hard, or not today, and then we've lost it forever.
Yeah. The narrative creeps in, the self-doubt, the saru. I get it. Powerful. I want to merge back into some of the tools that when I asked you and you said you shared about breaking down the actual word, and then also sharing about, for you, it's your cohort in your book. And I want to merge back into Ibasho and the importance, especially today, with that. But in the book, you reference this sort of duality of Ibasho for yourself. One is, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I can't remember, but what stood out to me is there's a park or a reservation outside of Melbourne that you'd go to, and just to do tree bathing, and just to walk and be by yourself. And then another one is those cohorts. So here you have this sort of duality from what I'm reading, and correct me if I'm wrong and guide me here on this thought. but one is like through, going and seeking, I think you reference it as yutori,
Yeah.
in nature,
Space.
and just go and being by yourself and disconnecting and letting go is one of your ibasho, but also being in community, and in your place. Like for me, of course, it's my dojo. I mean, my dojo is a canvas of my mind. It is my place. It is where I go to when I need to disconnect. It is my ibasho. But you really interestingly show these two different ways of ibasho for Nick. And one is going into the park in solitude and in silence, and the other is in community and connection. Can you unpack that for me a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, so this is where we get into perspectives or just learning. But we should touch on that Ibasho originally just means whereabouts, like where is the whereabouts of someone. So the word is a compound of the verb iru, meaning to exist, and basho, meaning place. And then I think in the late 70s, Japan started having these problems with loneliness or social withdrawal, and it started to be used as a psychological concept of a place where someone can be themselves, or where they can feel comfortable, have positive relationships, and have that belief in a positive future. But yeah, I started to learn, okay, it can be a place just for yourself where you feel grounded, you feel comfortable. It's a place to escape from the chaos of the world. And so it could be, for me, it's actually, it seems like a park, this place I go to, but it's actually, like, it seems like a national park, because once I'm in there, it's like, wow, I can't see any houses. But it's actually only like 10 minutes walk from where I am. And I actually have been going lately because I've been working too hard, and it's kind of showing up. Like, I'm a bit stressed, and I've broken this habit. I'm trying to learn so much. I will listen to a podcast on my walk. So I need to go back to don't take the phone, give myself this space, and have this quiet time. This space to have peace of mind is how I call it yutori. But then, I started to realize through research, there's this idea of social niche where you can be in some community or, small group or something like a dojo where you go there and you're welcomed, you feel safe, you have a sense of purpose, there's meaningful engagement, and there's something driving it. You're working towards something, and you can drop your guard and be yourself. And there's several papers on this. One by Dr. Shintaro Kono, who talks about it gives you the chance to be plain, meaning you're not trying to decorate yourself and pretend you're more than you are. And this is crucial. I think that we can have these places, these social niches where we can go and just be ourselves and say what we want to say and listen to others. We're trying to do that, through technology and online, and there's many benefits to, what we're doing now. It's great we can connect and have this discussion. But I think the in-person stuff really matters, and this is why we've got all these problems of loneliness and social withdrawal. Many people don't have an opportunity to just be themselves in a social context.
I do a lot of work with men, and one of the things I'm sure you know about is this epidemic of loneliness among men. And right now there's, I don't know what the statistic, I think I heard the other day, was 48% of men polled who are over 45 years old don't have one friend that they can call on. And that's like, just to hear it, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, you so beautifully use these two different references in your own Ibasho. Do you see in your cohorts and the people that you work with, the people that you listen to, the guests that you have on your podcast, is there a sweet spot? Is there a balance? Is there a 50-50 of like finding that solitude and then also being in community, or is it really dependent on the person? What do you say about that?
I think it's very dependent on the person. We all know there's some people who really enjoy their own time, own personality, and they struggle with any type of social interaction. And for them, it's being grounded or feeling a sense of belonging. Just might be, with their pet or by themselves or reading a book. So I think it's, very dependent on personality. But I think to some degree, all of us do need in-person contact, and at least if we all had just a handful of really good friends that we could always call and they could always call on us, it would give us that sense that, we matter and that others matter. And there's this mutual sense of belonging and connection. And we could argue we've got it all, this abundance. We should be all living incredible lives, yet most of us are struggling. Loneliness is okay. We all have loneliness from time to time, but obviously when it's prolonged and it's impacting your daily life for months on end, and you're not yourself, then that's where it's a problem.
Yeah, this importance really stands out. I know that in the blue zones and a lot of that longevity work, they talk about the studies that have happened with the elderly in Okinawa and how they're able to, and also like Sardinia and in these different pockets of the world, where one of the most important things is they have daily community and friends, and those friends together have this unified sort of purpose. And this is one of the main reasons that each one of them attribute to living over 100 years of happy life. And that's really beautiful to see.
It is beautiful. What's really funny about that concept of moai, this idea of a small group of lifelong friends, is
that's what it is. Yeah.
If it's really funny because they'll say it's almost like if you drink alone, you're probably going to have this early death. But if you drink among friends, the social factor of that seems to give you longevity. So,
is there a science behind that?
I wonder if there's been. I'd love to learn, but because that's what Dan said. Here's a group of Okinawans. Their average age is 86. They're all drinking. They're still having sex, and they're living this great life. And then, if you said, "Oh, this man's, no friends, no intimacy, he just drinks," you would assume, "Oh, well, he's headed for a early grave." So social connection and laughter and fun and sharing seems to really have all these positive well-being and mental, physical effects.
Yeah, there's so much here that I want to talk about. There's so much in the book, Nick, just in the book, not on the. I mean, if you want to go into the podcast, man, you're gonna get lost. You're just not going to be able to switch over to, put down Joe Rogan for a little while or whatever podcast you listen to, and listen to the Ikigai Tribe podcast. I want to talk about the relationship and the studies that you reference around flow state. There's so many other things that I want to talk about, and I know we're up on time here, and I want to be respectful of that. However, there's a word that you introduce in the book that I love, and I would love to hear you talk more about it. It's aruga mama, as it is, right? And the nature of how things truly are. And I'd never heard that word before. And I was like, that is amazing. Could you tell me something more about this or talk about it? Because you speak about it in your book and you spotlight it, but I'd like to hear from you more about what that word means and how it can be thought of in the scope of our Ikigai.
Yeah, this is another one of my favorite words. So aruga mama. So aru again, to exist, and mama, I guess, as that state. And you'd know this, like in Japan, when you go to Japan, you hear these expressions of acceptance, like shogunai, like I can't be helped. And I remember early in my learning Japanese days when in Melbourne I'd be making friends with Japanese, and something would happen, we'd have a plan and it would be cancelled because of rain or whatever. Yeah, I'd hear this expression shogunai, like, and I thought, wow, Japanese say this a lot, like, and they would also ask me, how do you say shogunai in English? And I'm like, oh, I'm not sure, like, and you sort of come up with, it can't be helped, or there's no way, like, as in there's no way to solve this, so we should just acceptance. So this idea of acceptance, I actually had initial resistance to it, maybe because I was young and naive. So this theme of acceptance in Japan was something I was aware of. Like Japanese, they have far more challenges than most countries with their natural disasters, for example, but they seem to accept it and regroup and build and move on. And then, yes, when Aru Gamama came into the research, it really took me a while to understand it, but it's this concept of understanding the true nature of things. And if you understand the true nature of things, it allows you to adapt and flow to life. Mm. Whereas if you have this resistance, why me? Why does this always happen to me? Or how can I solve this? You're stuck. You're stagnation. You're stopping yourself from flowing with life. And it's not a conscious act where you say, oh, this is Arugamama, like I'll just accept it. It's like you've conditioned yourself through life experience to move with the ebbs and flow of life, because you just think, well, this is the true nature of things. And you acknowledge it and then kind of let it go quickly, rather than trying to process it cognitively and logically. And I mean, I guess the only Western version is it is what it is, but it's more seems to sound better when it's Arugamala. It deeper, this idea, it's just the true nature of things. So if we can approach it like that, we seem to then let it go quickly, and we adapt and move on. So I think it's actually part of something called Morita therapy, or it's used in Morita therapy, but I think it's a Zen term, actually. And so we all know Zen is about this understanding of the true nature of things, and it also might have a connection with nature, as in if we're in tune with nature, we have all these benefits to life. But if man is deluded and thinks they can control nature, this is where we get into problems. And so, yeah, obviously we're trying to dominate nature, the natural world, and we have all these problems. Whereas nature kind of teaches us Arugamama, like seasons changed, things die, but they come back, they regrow. And so when you're in tune with that, yeah, that's Arugamama. You adapt and flow with life.
Thanks for breaking that down. That makes a lot better sense for me, at least. Yeah. Two last questions. One is for the listener. If we had kind of sort of mentioned this a little bit earlier, and I'd referenced, there's probably someone listening who just is like, I'm not depressed, maybe I am, but I just don't really feel as though I have direction in my life right now. I don't have that Ikigai that these guys are talking about. And it's kind of easy for you to say, but I just, I'm at this place where I don't have that. Nick, what's the what's the starting point for that person? What's that one step that they can take after listening to our conversation?
There's a few things. I think we need to be clear that Ikigai is not, it's not the Japanese secret to happiness. So we shouldn't equate Ikigai to happiness. Ikigai, if we go back to the needs of Kami and Miko, the most fundamental need is life satisfaction. So I think regardless of what we're going through, we can always probably find some life satisfaction in something if we're present, or if we're grateful enough for what we already have. And, that could be just that we live in a safe country, or we have access to all these small joys, coffee, food, music. We have all these freedoms. So be clear that it's about life satisfaction and this idea that you're moving forward. And so probably the idea of moving forward is where we struggle. Because, if you're living on repeat every day and you're thinking, oh, what's the point of it all? Like, I'm just living the same day every day. That is hard. So I think you've really got to tap into your values, but also it's almost like tapping into the wisdom of the inner child. And when I say the inner child, I'm sort of saying this playful version of yourself that loved something that you can still explore as an adult. And we lose that. We lose that ability to find what's intrinsically motivating and go with when we, once we become a teenager and a young adult, we're worried about career and what am I going to do. So if you can find that, or if there is this inner voice saying there's an injustice that you need to correct, whether it's just a small thing, or if if you can create this internal conversation of what do I care about, what do I want to change, in focusing on something else that you care about seems to change you and then give you all these things we've talked about, a sense of purpose, change and growth, this feeling you're moving forward. Now, not everyone needs that. I've got a friend he's pretty much happy to live the same day over and over. He's single and he's got a lot of freedom and he loves movies and he has no desire to find a craft or better himself. He's very happy. But I know for many of us, we want something more out of life. We want a sense of purpose that we're contributing. So maybe it is about contribution and finding your way to contribute. It might take a while. Even Kami and Miko said, we all have this vague sense of purpose, and it may take us a while to find it. But she said there's 3 ways to find your sense of purpose or your purpose in life, and that's from a conscious choice, or through an area of interests. So maybe when we were younger, we had all these interests and we've given them up because society told us to, work hard and buy a house and be successful. Or it may be through, fate where it finds you. And maybe Ikigai for me was like a combination of all those things. There were these elements of serendipity, but there was this conscious decision of, right, I will do something about it. And I was interested in all these ideas of positive psychology and, obviously Japanese culture. But you've got to allow yourself. So there's also this idea of you feel good about yourself enough to try something, to do something, and that you can believe that, it's okay for me to explore this and try this. Because we do kind of beat ourselves up a lot as well.
Yeah.
And that stops us from acting on our intuition.
Yeah. Wow, that was a great answer. I really appreciated the part about playfulness. That was a whole nother thing that, I've heard mentioned on the podcast. You touch on in your book, and that going and finding that youthfulness and play. So I'm glad you brought that forward. I'd love to unpack that more, but I want to, I'm going to include in this podcast, wherever anybody's listening to this, all of the ways to contact Nick and join the Ikigai Tribe, learn more about his work. It's all going to be there. So I'm not going to ask you how they get in touch with you, but what I do want to know is, Nick, what do you have working on? What are you working on right now? What can we look forward to in 2025 from Ikigai Tribe? And where's your focus right now?
Well, I really think I need to get back to Japan and spend more time in Japan. So there is an idea that I will do, I guess what I'll call Ikigai retreats.
Cool.
Where I would try and take a handful of people somewhere in Japan, away from all the tourist hotspots, and do some sort of conscious, I guess you could call it conscious tourism meets learning about Ikigai. And we would find a place where we'd probably stay in that one location. We would learn about Ikigai and learn it through experience. So maybe looking at craftspeople, doing things with nature, being involved with, maybe cooking our own food. And I'll try and get guests or locals involved. And so really offer a experiential version of, my program. That would be the goal. So the goal is to do the first one this year and see how that goes. And then
in 2024?
Yeah. Later this year. And then if it's a success, and once I've got a handle on how to do it, 2 times a year, and who knows? I mean, I might end up back living in Japan, because it's quite odd. I'm not living in Japan at the moment, and my whole life is focused on this word, and so that's what I've got to look forward to, and it's it's a challenge as well. So that's another thing. A meaningful challenge makes your life worth living. So we can all have that too. Yeah,
I love that. Well, Nick, I just want to, again, thank you. This has been an incredible and really inspiring conversation. I'd love it if you if you kept in contact, and I'd like to share once you open up that retreat and you have more information about it. I'm sure there's some listeners here that are saying, hey, where do I'd might want to sign up to that. I know a lot of the people who listen to this podcast travel to Japan once or twice a year. And if they could align that trip with something that you're doing,
sure,
that may be something that they're interested in. That'd be really cool. Thank you so much, Nick, for taking your time. I'm looking forward to your next work. I'm looking forward to hearing from any of the listeners who have read Ikigai-kan and what their takeaways were and how you've changed their life. And yeah, Nick, thank you so much. I appreciate you so much, man. Take care.
Thank you, Adam. I'm real joy. It was lovely to hear from you, and it's always nice when someone reads my book and they share its impact on them. So it really means a lot to me. So I really appreciate that so much.
Shugyo is brought to you by the Yasaragi Dojo, a traditional Japanese martial arts school and nonprofit 501c3 organization located in New York. I'm your host, Adam Mitchell, and I truly hope that you found some value and inspiration from this conversation. If you'd like to learn more about our dojo, yes, it's an actual physical dojo, not just some virtual one made up on the internet, find us on the web at yasaragidojo.com. The link is in the show notes. Or go ahead and access our free mobile app for iPhone and Android. There, you can access our daily training, coaching, live streams, meditations, workshops, and both online and in-person retreats. Our work depends on the generosity of our supporters, dedicated students around the world, and you by listening to this episode. So if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to this channel, and you'll be updated on new episodes and reflections as they roll out. And if you know someone who will enjoy the conversation that we had today, please go ahead and share. Once again, my name is Adam. This is Shugyo. Until next time.